Hello, students. This is Dr. Winkler again. We are moving right along. This is a lecture for the Ancient Civilizations course, and this is lecture number 7. Hopefully everything's going well for you. I'm enjoying this morning so far, and I'm going to enjoy this even more as we get into our discussion of ancient civilizations. Let's pick up to where we were at before. We're talking about the ancient Hebrews. Remember, I said the ancient Hebrews are extremely important in the modern mentality, heavily influencing Judaism, Christianity, and also Islam. Well, we're talking about some of the moral aspects, the moral teachings. I'm trying to make a comparison here between other civilizations. I've mentioned Seneca and Rome in a slightly different, well, actually as a point of comparison. And to show you what is different about the Hebrew ideas of right and wrong, of being good. Now, the last point I was discussing was right here. And this is, the Hebrews do not like, well, they condemn torture. They simply don't torture, which is very unusual in the ancient world. Almost everybody believes in torture at some level. Torture slaves, torture prisoners of war. They also dislike war. Also very unusual in the ancient world. Almost all the civilizations glorify war. As we look at ancient Rome as another example, we look at ancient Rome. Ancient Rome is, wow, talk about a military society. Talk about a society that conquers areas and takes over the Italian peninsula and the Mediterranean basin and Western Europe. I mean, it's a stunning accomplishment as to what they do. So obviously they revel in this. This is something to be proud of. We do see a few conquests, remember, going back to King David. We see a few conquests from the Hebrews, but in reality, they don't glorify this. This is something that you have to do at various times. The Hebrews are not pacifists, but they do believe you have to defend yourself. And this is a necessity. This is nothing that you glorify. This is nothing that you're proud of. I mentioned the modern Jews do not have crossed swords above their fireplaces. They don't have muskets, antique muskets on the wall either. These are fairly embarrassing to the faith because it's not what the faith is about. And I left you last time with a story about Rabbi Silverman from the main synagogue in Salt Lake City, Kol Ami, who gave a talk at BYU, and in a question and answer session, he was asked, why are the Jews such ferocious fighters, and how do you motivate yourself to be so good at it? Remember, Silverman was not happy. Remember, he said, you can mention a few people that happen to be Jews that had military success. But for every one of those people, he can list 10 other people. He didn't say this, but I would hazard to guess that people you could be proud of in Judaism for making contributions to moral thinking and moral action. Well, let's look at another issue here when we're talking about kosher. Kosher. In Hebrew, the emphasis is always on the last syllable. If I were to pronounce this properly, it wouldn't be kosher. It'd be more like kosher. Any event, kosher, ritually acceptable. You're all familiar with the dietary restrictions that these people follow. They don't eat pork. This is simply not done. They don't eat crab. They're actually the definition of what is ritually acceptable, the kinds of animals that you can eat. The Bible says it has a cloven hoof and it chews the cud. Pigs technically have a cloven hoof, but pigs do not chew their cud. Cattle, sheep, goats would all fit in things that are ritually acceptable. As we look at the kinds of things that are forbidden under Hebrew law, we do believe the origins of this is probably an issue of health. Pork is a meat that can spoil very rapidly in a hot climate, as we see in Palestine. And if you have a lot of pork around, you do run the risk of getting food poisoning. Crabs, same kind of issue. Now you can eat fish. Fish are perfectly acceptable. They do not deteriorate so fast. So we can say these are good, healthful foods to eat. And the other things, you have to be careful about those so they come to be forbidden. Well, let's say that I own a sheep or a cow or whatever. This is perfectly acceptable to eat. But so I said, well, let's have a little fun with it. I mean, come on, I can kill it, eat it. Of course, that's acceptable. Let's have some fun. Let's get a hot poker, right? A hot poker and stick it in their ribs. So the animal screams in its agony. And, oh, let's have some more fun. Let's stick the dogs on so the dogs tear the tail off and drag it down. Question I would ask you, can I eat it? The sheep, the goat, the cow is the animal you can eat. But can I eat the animal that was killed in that manner? If we were in a classroom, I'd like to do this with my students. I'll say, okay, it's ritually acceptable. Why can't I eat it? Because it did not die in the prescribed manner. The Bible also tells you how to slaughter an animal that you're going to eat. Essentially, there's two issues involved. That the animal die with the least amount of pain possible, usually by the slitting of the throat. The blood comes out, the animal bleeds to death. Of course, when the blood comes out, then that actually helps preserve the meat as well. So there's more than one reason why you'd want to do this. See, the animal has to feel pain when it dies. But if you inflict unnecessary pain on the animal, it's unacceptable. Now, under the same idea, hunting is not strictly forbidden according to Hebrew law. There's no place in these 613 laws where it says, you shall not hunt, don't hunt. It doesn't really say that. So I guess technically if it's not prescribed, then you can do it. It's not strictly forbidden. However, if you take the animal and you kill it by hunting, and it can be with an arrow or a snare or whatever, you can take it, but you can't eat it because it didn't die in the prescribed manner. Do we really read about in the ancient Hebrews, about the great hunter? The man out there bringing in his various animals he caught, and now we're going to eat it. No. If you want to hunt, people would say, yeah, it's probably not a good idea. It's not terribly, it's not forbidden, but you can't eat it. Now, why am I making a deal about this? It is interesting, I think. But in my standpoint, a religion that would take so much care in the treatment of animals. This is millennia before our time frames when we finally get laws about it's really in the 19th century. It starts out in Britain before it comes to the United States, where we actually have laws to protect animals from suffering. I mean, this is millennia ahead of its time. Why do we make a big deal about this? Animal rights, yeah, we can make that argument. But there's another statement here as well. If a religion cares that much about the treatment of animals, it is not terribly surprising that this same religion would care a great deal about the treatment of human beings. Something else here. Glorify work. Most of the people making records in ancient Greece and ancient Rome are upper class. I mean, one of the reasons why this is not terribly surprising is that the upper class people tend to be very, very well educated, so they can write books and essays and dialogues. They also have spare time because they have somebody else, slaves, that are doing the work for them. You see, if we look at these people in the ancient world, they say work, physical labor, manual labor is degrading. Why would you work? Why would you do this? No, no, no. You have to be on top of the game. Only low-class people, only slaves do manual labor. One thing that a decent person would never do is work. You're not going to see these guys with calluses on their hands. They're not doing much of anything as far as physical labor is concerned. Now, hopefully they're writing books. Once in a while they become military officers and they're out in the field ordering people in combat and dying. So work is simply low class. You simply do not do it. But the Hebrews glorify work. They glorify work. They have an idea that if you're not working, you're not contributing. I mean, if you do own the labors of other people, you do not contribute unless you're doing something. Even the rabbis, we talked about rabbinical Judaism developing probably around 400 BC. 200 BC, and more recently. These people are teachers, but they're supposed to have an occupation as well. They are supposed to, whatever the occupation might be, farmer, carpenter, brick mason, whatever. So this is another example of how the Hebrews believe that you shouldn't have burdensome people in society. Everybody should contribute. This is very unusual in the ancient world. Something else here, we have disliked slavery. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the Hebrews did not have slaves, or by definition had a kind of slavery. Remember when I was introducing slavery, we were talking about Mesopotamia. Remember I said that the severest form of slavery is chattel slavery, where you really don't even own your own body. This does not mean there aren't other gradations of slavery. Sometimes there are people that do have a few rights. There are sometimes, maybe slavery is, I know the Bible uses the term slavery, but in reality, we would call this more like bond servants. A bond servant you usually control for a certain length of time. And then a bond servant does own his or her own body and cannot be abused in a heavy level. But it's quite fascinating that if people end up in slavery, or I would call bondage, they have certain rights which are literally explained in the Bible. So a slave cannot be abused, and a slave has to be treated well. Let's get you down here to Deuteronomy 15 and 12. Slaves, bondservants, are freed in the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year is every 7th year, as I will be explaining in 1 second. When the 7th year comes, you must let him go. My long quotes sometimes don't fit well here, do they? I guess I could use a different size font, but then you wouldn't be able to see this easily. Let's go back. When the 7th year comes, you must let him go. Oh boy, here we go again. Now I'm up to chattel slavery. Now I'm in China. I need to be a little more accurate where I have my cursor. And now I'm beyond where I want to be. Okay. Disliked slavery, they had to be treated well. Freed in the Jubilee year, Deuteronomy 15 and 12. When the 7th year comes, you must let him, see if I can get it right this time, must let him go free. Okay. It's not a lengthy period of time. Now, in the 7-year period, if you're a bondservant or a slave, at the beginning you can be a slave for 7 years. If you are, shall we say, later in that 7-year period, you can be bondservants for 3 or 4 years, something like that. So why 7? Well, remember We talked about the sun, the moon, the stars. Not the stars, sun, moon, and planets. That in reality, 7 becomes a holy number. So it's not terribly surprising that they would use 7. When the Jubilee year comes, every 7th year, when you set him free, you have to set him free. When you set him free, do not send him away empty-handed. Give him generously, including sheep, grain, and wine. Now, wait a minute. You're a slave, but you have to be freed. You're a slave, but when you're freed, you have to be paid. We say this is a pretty loose definition of slavery, is it not? Okay, you have to be paid and you have to be freed. And the reminder, this always hits a lot of Israelites, a lot of Hebrews. In Deuteronomy 16:12, it says, it's the good old catchphrase, I love it, remember you were slaves in Egypt. When you were slaves in Egypt, did you want to be free? Yes. Did you want to be compensated for what you did? Yes. How could you possibly deny that to people who have to be in bondage to you? We don't really read so much about slavery among the ancient Hebrews as coming from wars, because you don't really do that much conquering. Most of the people that actually end up in bondage or in slavery are people that are economically challenged. And simply say, I've got to figure out a way of supporting my family. So they will give themselves over as bonds, as slaves, for a length of time. But they can't be abused. They have to be treated well. And they have to be freed, and they have to be paid. Now we have something extremely interesting here. Do not sacrifice children. I haven't gone in a lot of depth about ancient religion this time frame, but sacrifice is very, very an integral part of many religions. Why do you sacrifice to the gods? Well, shall we say, to show your sincerity. It's easy, is it not, for me to walk out in the field, or if I'm a priest or priestess at a temple, and I raise my hands to the gods and say, boy, you're a great God and we love you. I mean, could it be idle flattery? Sure. How do you show the gods that you are sincere? By giving up something to them, sacrificing to them. You say, well, I want to show my sincerity. So let's get that goat over there. He's diseased anyway. Probably not going to eat him. So let's take him up and do him in. If he is worth eating, you take him over, you do him in, and then when the God's not looking, well, we killed him for you, didn't we? Now let's have him for dinner. Take him down and eat him. How can you make sure that the gods know that you're sincere? You're not just knocking off a sick sheep, and you're not just figuring out a way of getting something for dinner tonight. You burn up the offering. You slaughter the animal, and you burn it up. Is that sincerity? Well, you take your best sheep, your best goat, your best cow, without spot, without blemish. So you're sacrificing, you're giving up something for them. But let's get serious. It's just an animal. I've certainly got another animal someplace else. How about real sincerity? Real sincerity. Let's kill people. Let's kill my son. Let's kill my daughter. Human sacrifice is known among almost all ancient civilizations. Mesopotamia, Egypt. Very early on, we actually read about the possibility of human sacrifice in Greece. We also read early on about the possibility of human sacrifice in Rome. This is not unheard of. this is done. Genesis, shall we say, Adonai, the Lord, condemns this. You do not sacrifice your children. Let me refer you to a story. You're all familiar with this. And this is Genesis 22. You're all familiar with the story of Abraham. Sure, you were paying attention in Sunday school. And Abraham, remember, he's very old. His wife is really old. And they're in their 90s, over 100, something like that. But the Lord promised them that their descendants would be without number, like the stars in the sky, or like the sands on the seashore, just without number. But I don't have any kids. So how's this going to happen? So can we say Isaac becomes the miracle child? He's born late in their lives, way beyond a time when you normally expect people to be having children. Well, he's got this son. Well, you think he adores the kid? Oh, that kid's probably doesn't really say this in the Bible, but I imagine he's pretty spoiled. People pay a lot of attention to that kid. And then the messenger. In the Bible, an angel is a messenger from the Lord. The messenger comes, the angel comes and tells Abraham, you've got to sacrifice Isaac to the Lord. You got to kill that kid. Now, I'm going to read between the lines here a little bit. How does Abraham react when he's given this message? Shall we say this commandment, this order, to kill his son? He doesn't say, sacrifice a child? Sacrifice a human being? No, I've never heard of any such thing. It is ridiculous. Nothing like this ever happens. He doesn't say that, does he? He goes, son of a gun, guess what I've got to do? Now you're familiar with the story. The kid's kind of catching on here. Says, well, Dad, we're supposed to sacrifice to the Lord. But where's the sacrificial animal? And Abraham says, well, the Lord will provide. Just as he's raising the knife, he's bound this child. Just as he's taking the knife, raising the knife to kill him, the angel comes back and says, oh, wait a minute, you passed the test. And then they find an animal in the thicket, and they sacrifice that animal. Okay, Abraham's reaction, I think, tells us a little bit about it. But is there a wide message here? I know we can talk about obedience to the Lord and these kind of things, but is the Lord saying to Abraham, and by extension the Hebrew people, we don't do it this way. We don't sacrifice people. And that, I think, is one of the interpretations you can take from this story. Leviticus 18 and 21. Do not give any of your children, let me get the cursor on this so you can follow it easily. Leviticus 18 and 21. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech. These are graven images. Remember, this is what you and I call Palestine. The Canaanites tend to live in the northern part of the area. And later on, we're going to associate some of them with Phoenicians. We'll come back and talk about them presently. But we do know that there was a lot of sacrifice going on up there, not just from the biblical records, but also from archaeological excavations. They actually do go, and they've done excavations. Archaeologists have done this, and they've found, shall we say, rooms full of jars with the burnt remains of children in them. This is not hypothetical. This is being done. And it's being done on a large scale. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch. Do not sacrifice your children. This is something that's different from the ancient Hebrews. Well, they believe in, shall we say, restricted activities. Once again, Leviticus 18, this time in verse 20. Do not have intercourse with another man's wife. Okay. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Don't commit adultery. Is it true in other societies? You do have a tendency to have liaisons, which are kind of prohibited. Yeah, I'm sure it does happen. But I don't think there's really any society that does believe that you can just sleep with somebody's wife just because you want to. But we're talking about, shall we say, limiting activity. No man is to, come back here, to have sexual relations with another man. Okay? Don't like this kind of thing. No man or woman, verse 23, no man or woman is to have sexual relations with an animal. You go, talk about sick. I know I'm being gross. I don't mean to offend your sensitivities, though it does offend mine even to know about this or talk about it. But we do read at certain times that animals were trained to have sex with people in the ancient world. Now, we call this bestiality. But it was done. And of course, this is being condemned. Now, before I go too far with this discussion, hanky-panky in marriage is encouraged. Okay. Hanky-panky is fine. Later on, this is interpreted, what do you do on the Sabbath day? You go home with your husband or your wife and you have hanky-panky. Very commonly done. Rabbis were encouraged to marry at an early age. They were encouraged to have children. You see, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, according to the ancient Hebrews, later the Jews, hanky-panky is to be enjoyed. Enjoy hanky-panky, as long as it's within the boundaries of acceptable marriage. When this kind of gets a bad name, at least among many modern people, is that Christians later discourage hanky-panky. They discourage hanky-panky before you're married. And later on, they're going to discourage hanky-panky in marriage. The only reason why you can have a physical liaison between husband and wife is just for procreation. Not for recreation, not for enjoyment, just for procreation. And the remainder of the time, no, you shouldn't have it at all. Goodness. And then when you do have a liaison, there has to be a prescribed manner. You can't just do it the way you want to. So let me quit being so embarrassed and go on and talk about a few other things. In any event, we do get an idea of the nature of the religion being a very moral religion. Let's go and talk about a few other things now. We've kind of been talking about civilizations. Let's get into the flow of history a little bit. Around 1200 BC, give or take years on either side, we do have what we call the era of crises. And this is when civilizations are being stressed. Part of this comes from new technology. There are Hittites. Let's get some Hittites up for you here. The Hittites are in what you and I would call modern Anatolia, which is also modern Turkey. This is basically their civilization. We can read their writing. They did write. And looking at their word choice, they're Indo-Europeans. In other words, they are somewhat related to many other European languages, French, Latin, Greek, English, among others. So there are some similarities here. We talk about in the modern world, and very fortunately, the Cold War seems to be over, at least for the time being, even though there's international tensions as you and I speak. One of the issues of the Cold War was military technology. We were in a race with the Soviets, the United States was in a race with the Soviets, over combat aircraft, guidance systems, weapons that can penetrate armor, all these kinds of things. Obviously, if there's a military clash, having better technology is clearly to your advantage. I already talked about the second intermediate in Egypt, where the Hyksos coming in with bronze, better bows, and chariots. Well, there's another leap right here in technology, and that is iron. As far as we know, the Hittites were the first people to master the smelting of iron. We didn't know about this before. Now, iron is known in very small amounts. As you know, when meteors come to Earth, they're either made out of stone or they're made out of iron. Stone has a tendency to burn up more readily. It burns more rapidly. So a stone meteor is less likely to hit the ground. One made of iron, it burns up too. But if made of iron, actually has a better chance of surviving and hitting the ground. You could imagine what this would be like. If you're out someplace, and of course you're looking at the stars, wow, beautiful. And you see something goes streaking by. And if you have reason to believe that one of those hit the earth, and maybe you walk over with the other shepherds and look around, you see this stone, and it's made of iron. It's not a beautiful, iron's not a beautiful metal. It's kind of dark and gray. But you can imagine the value of that. I mean, just a little chunk of that could go for very high prices because it's a gift from God. Sometimes people think it's a gift from the heavens, but it's rare. So it is known. To be able to turn some iron in a few places into technology, that's a big leap. We think what the Hittites were doing was using bog iron. I am not a geologist, so please bear with me. Under certain circumstances, geological circumstances, stream beds have a tendency to leave iron deposits. In other words, within the sand along the side of a creek. If you take that and you heat it up enough, so the slag, that's non-iron essentially, goes out of that. And actually what you would do is end up like this. You would actually have the slag and the iron is heated up enough. And then by pounding, get a big hammer and pound out the slag, then you're left with the iron. As far as the advancement of use of metals are concerned, it's almost a little surprising that iron comes late. Iron is not that rare. It's not like tin, which you use in making bronze. It's in a lot of different places. And I've already mentioned bog iron. You don't necessarily have to have an ore where you go into the ground and dig it out. You have it there on stream banks. I'm sure you're familiar with this from your geology studies. A good place to examine this would be like southern Utah. Southern Utah has red rocks, have a lot of red rocks. Why are they red? By the way, if you haven't been to Zion Canyon, go. It's absolutely drop dead gorgeous there. These huge stone walls, thousands of feet high, red stone, stunning. Well, why makes them red? It is ferric oxide, rust. Iron has combined with oxygen to create rust, and rust happens to be red. So you have red stones in southern Utah. Why do you not have big iron ore mines down there? Because the amount of rust you need, the amount of ferric oxide you need to make the red stone is not very much. It can be quite a little, what, 1% or so, very, very little. And that's not commercial in any real sense. But iron is located in many places. As you know, that iron has a tendency to be somewhat magnetized. I have been told that if you're looking for iron deposits in anywhere in the world, for example, get in your airplane, put your compass there. You're flying along, and you get a place, and the compass goes. The compass says, "Whoa, something's wrong here." Guess what? Magnetism, the iron down here, is in heavy numbers. So you can go down there and examine it, see if it's commercially viable. So iron's around. Why it takes so long to develop this is not quite explained. I would argue this, that the melting point of iron has a tendency to be a higher temperature. I hope I'm right in saying this, than some of these other metals like copper, which we've mentioned in passing. So to understand how to use iron technology, you really do have to figure out, you have to heat it up to a higher degree. Now, however, we do believe the Hittites were the first people to smelt iron. And now you can make iron implements, you can make iron tools and iron weapons. If you have a bronze sword, for example, and you try to slash with that against somebody's shield, it'll just simply bust up the bronze. So when you have bronze weapons, knives, swords, you have a tendency to thrust with them. But if you have an iron sword, the blade's made out of iron, not only can you thrust with that weapon, you can slash with it. And that is a big advantage in a military situation. So the Hittites smelled iron. And this becomes a crisis in a lot of places, because now the people who do not have iron technology are way behind in the game. And if you meet somebody who does have iron technology, you got a problem on your hands. Also at this time frame, of course later on, when other people get iron technology, then the advantage the Hittites have initially disappears because other people do have iron technology as well. Another example, of course, is people's on the move. For whatever reason, it seems like every so often, every several hundred years, we get people moving. And we have people moving from areas around the Black Sea, which is very common. People's on the move. There are some people we call the sea peoples. See if I can get a map for you here. Well, sea peoples come from the sea. You all knew that. How about maps? No maps here. Okay, let's try this. The sea people essentially, well, these are the Greeks. The sea people come out of the Black Sea area. And I think I'm getting something that's more misleading than helpful. Talking about the Greeks moving at the same time, I will mention that. I'd like to get more on the sea peoples. Anyway, let's ignore the arrows for a few minutes. Sea peoples come out of the Black Sea area up here. Obviously, coming by ship is high technology. You know, these aren't country bumpkins. These are pretty sophisticated societies. And these aren't just raiders, though they do raid. They go down and grab your sheep and run back. They do raid. But they are actually migrating as well. And so you're putting your sheep and your goats and your husband and your wife and your kids, and you're going in large numbers. You attack and you come in and occupy. The sea peoples are so good that they actually overwhelmed the Hittites. After the sea peoples hit, we don't hear much about the Hittites anymore because they're gone. Now, unfortunately for our area, the Hittites could write, but the sea peoples could not. So the Hittites fall, they do come down, they attack Egypt, largely from Palestine. Egypt's hard pressed. Remember, Egypt had holdings up in this area because the Hittites and the Egyptians are fighting up in Syria. When the sea peoples take out the Hittite Empire, of course this collapses. And then the sea peoples press the attack into Egypt. They are not successful in taking Egypt. But Egypt is forced to withdraw its forces to defend the country proper, so they are removed from this area. To a certain extent, this causes a power vacuum right here. And if this area had been dominated, let's say, by the Egyptians or the Hittites for a lengthy period of time, the Hebrew culture, the Hebrew religion, might not have developed. But we have a time frame between conquest, between domination, where it gives the Hebrews a chance to develop their civilization without being dominated by somebody else. In their lack of success, their failure in taking Egypt, these people are, okay, I want a map. The Philistines, is that a good map? I guess we can use this one. The Philistines are essentially retreat back here. And we talk about them in 5 cities. What we know most about the Philistines is reading in the Bible, because there's fighting all the time. I already talked about David and Goliath. David, this teenage boy, is pretty good with a sling. He's out there fighting this basketball/football player, pretty macho man, who happens to be a Philistine. Perhaps the most famous person to fight the Philistines was Samson. Samson, I forget how many people got a jawbone of an ass, and there's a jawbone of a donkey. It's pretty strong bones right there. And he kills, how many, I can't remember what the Bible said, thousands of Philistines. We read about them as competitors. We read about those as people that are fighting the Hebrews. They're a little bit of a mystery people. By that I mean, we don't really know who they were. Long time ago in an article, you look at the artifacts. Okay, why we don't know who they are, they didn't write. No written records have ever been found. If we found written records by them, then we could look at them linguistically and have a pretty good idea who they'd be. Since they apparently could not write, at least no written records have yet been found, we're a little bit miffed about who they were. Now, at about the same time, from about the same area, the Dorian Greeks, we'll talk about Greece later, are migrating into Greece. About the same place, about the same time. Could they be the same peoples? Certainly they could be. Some archaeologists, this article I read a long time ago, says the artifacts would lead us to believe there's enough similarity between the artifacts among the Philistines and those of the Greeks that we can say these people were probably Greek. Now, I'm not sure in reading about this more recently if everybody buys that argument. And there's actually been attempts in looking at their remains to look at their DNA and say, well, who were these people related to? But this is another example of the year of crises. Things are happening. Let's get down here before I blow everything. Other people are on the moves. Semitic peoples, the Assyrians, remember the bad dudes? They flay you alive and put your hide on the doors and gates of the city. They begin their conquests. And Indo-Europeans, remember, the Greeks speak an Indo-European language. Very well related to many other Indo-European languages, including English. They're also on the move at the same time. Of course, the Greeks, the Dorian Greeks, are actually moving into Greece proper. Now let's look at something else that's happening about this time frame. Let's take a look at the Phoenicians. How about a map? How about I get the letters right? Let's see. Maybe just go to images and see what we got on that. I guess any of these would work. How about that one? Is that large enough? I'd like to get one a little bit bigger so you might be able to see a little bit better. And nonetheless, we're talking about the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians come from what you and I call Lebanon. These areas over here. This is actually showing the places where they went. Now, let's make a contrast with them and the sea peoples. The sea people, obviously, you don't build a ship in the middle of the sea. You build on the land and move out. But these are people that are very good at seafaring, who end up settling and becoming farmers, like was the case with the Philistines. The Phoenicians are different. The Phoenicians start out as people on the coast, farmers, and then they end up being seafaring people. So you kind of go in the opposite direction. They are speaking a Hebrew language. It might be a language very similar to Hebrew. It might be a dialect of Hebrew, but they're speaking the same language. That's not terribly surprising. The Hebrew peoples aren't the only people from this area of the Middle East. There's other people there. And why, of course, the people who follow Yahweh, which I'm using as the people that are Hebrews, the people that follow Elohim, their religion, are the ones I was focusing on. But there's other people in the areas. I already mentioned the Canaanites. They're also speaking Hebrew. There is no problem with communication. So, let's see if I can get a little bit better map for so I get a map for them in the Middle East. Yeah, does that work? Okay. Now we have the Canaanites are over here. They're very closely related to these people. And we usually say the Phoenicians are largely along here, largely in modern day Lebanon. Of course, they go up into Syria and down into Palestine as well. The major cities are on the coastline. Anyway, these farmers have turned to sailors. One of the reasons why they can do this, they have resources, one of which is trees. The cedars of Lebanon. So they can go up in the hill country and they have a rich supply of wood. So wood is very helpful, obviously, in making ships. We remember them in several areas. Traders, you trade back and forth. Colonizers, they set up colonies. And explorers. Let's go back to our original maps. We have these people here and they become involved in the carrying trade. As you well know, when you're involved in carrying trade, it's usually, sometimes we call this the middleman, who makes the big money. You produce your goods, your product right here. And the people who produce this make money. Then you transport that to market. And you have your market over here. People are making money here. People are making money here. But transportation is actually the biggest place to make money. And the Phoenicians actually control the carrying trade of the Mediterranean. Now later on, the Greeks are going to take over. But the time frame we're discussing, the carrying trade is largely by the Phoenicians. Now, if you're trading in the Mediterranean, I don't know why I got a problem with that map. I want a bigger map. All right, go back to it. If you're trading in the Mediterranean, of course, your headquarters, shall we say, are right over here. And you look that there is a fairly good trade until you get to what's the central Mediterranean, and you actually have a choke point right here between Sicily and Tunisia, modern Tunisia, North Africa, right there. If you can control this area, can't you control what's happening? So how about colonies on Sicily that are Phoenician? Sure. But the big one is Carthage. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Carthage becomes one of the most important colonies of the Phoenicians. And it becomes the last major state that has any chance of stopping the Romans. We'll have to discuss that later when we talk about the Roman Empire. But so we got traders carrying trade throughout the Mediterranean. Colonizers, there are colonies in a number of places, but the most the ones we hear most about, is over here at Carthage. And explorers. Very unfortunately, we really don't have a lot of records from the Phoenicians themselves. Yes, they could write. And I'll make a big deal about this in just a while. But we have these people that they're keeping records, but their records have not come down to us. So what do we know about them? Well, sailors are running all over the Mediterranean. Of course, the Greeks are going to talk to them. We do have some accounts from the Greeks about the Phoenicians being, well, the Phoenicians are a bunch of liars. Really? Yeah, they're a bunch of liars. Can you imagine what these people are saying? Oh my goodness. They say that there was a behest by a pharaoh down in Egypt to ask somebody to circumnavigate Africa. Whoa, Africa's a big, big place. Anyway, according to the story, remember, the Phoenicians are liars. According to the story, they sailed out, went out in the Atlantic, and it took a long time. Eventually circumnavigated Africa and came back over here. There's part of the story that they were down and off the coast, and they were trying to find where the coast of Africa no longer went south, but should go north again. There was fog. Then the fog was lifted, and suddenly the coastline was no longer on their east. The coastline was on their west. When they realized that, they knew they could go up to Africa. Now, this is extremely challenging, to say the least. Was it possible? If it was possible by anybody, it would have been the Phoenicians. Maybe this is just a bunch of hokum. Now, however, there's something else that we can probably give them a little more credit for. I'm going to try to find a map of Phoenician exploration, but I doubt I'll find what I'm looking for. I'm going to try it anyway. Okay. Yeah, we're kind of down to where I was at again. There is a story that the Phoenicians told the Greeks. And that was that they sailed outside of the Mediterranean. We get in here a little bit. They left over here, or maybe one of their colonies, and they sailed. And they sailed outside of out into the North Atlantic. Now, there's more challenges in sailing the North Atlantic because the winds are not as predictable and the sea is rougher, but the Phoenicians could probably do this. And they went to a land up north where they could get tin. On the west coast of the island of Britain, we find tin. For many hundreds of years, people would come here. Apparently, initially, tin was just laying on the surface. You pick it up. After a while, you had to dig down. And there are some excavation sites that go back many hundreds of years that that we know that the people were there. People there digging tin, and there's probably some villages or towns nearby that were involved in the tin trade. So this is probably our best explanation as to that story. Now that's remarkable. That's a long ways. Another one, of course, is this. They said that they went farther north. Okay, move the map up here, and they went farther north. And there was a place up here where the sun never came up in the wintertime, and it never went down in the summer. The Arctic Circle's not on this, but I believe it comes, well, let's be a little more accurate. Arctic Circle restaurants, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay. And they found me up. They do this to me personally. Anyway, the Arctic Circle's kind of right along here. And it is true. I'm not going to say it's a lengthy period of time or anything, but it is true that in the summertime, the sun does not go down. And the wintertime, the sun does not come up. Hello. The Greeks are saying, you Guys are so full of beans. Talk about ridiculous. Who would possibly believe such a thing? Well, there are people who do believe it. This does happen. Now, can we actually say the Phoenicians got that far north? Well, yeah, we can certainly make that argument. On the other hand, they wouldn't have to have gone there. They could have actually talked to some local peoples who did know about this. But I think it's more likely they were actually there. We say this is quite stunning. There have been stones found in Latin America that people claim there are Phoenician writing on them. Now, I'm very skeptical about this. If you have a stone, why would the Phoenicians be sitting there with a stone with the grooves on the stone and write a letter and then toss it aside? I don't know why you would do this. On the other hand, you have to be very careful. You look at a stone and you scratch it on stone. Some guy has chalk and he looks at this and goes, "Oh, can you see that? Can you see it there?" See, if you follow the grooves in a certain manner, you can make it look like a crude letter from the Phoenician alphabet. Was it technically possible for these people to come to Latin America? I guess it was technically possible, but I don't see any convincing evidence anywhere that they were in fact did that. Okay. Sailed around Africa, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, yeah. To England beyond, sure, perhaps. I believe this really quite likely. Now, we're going back to sacrificing babies. One of the reasons why it's hard to have a great deal of sympathy for these people, and I know I'm being a terrible moralist and I'm putting my modern interpretation on what happened in the ancient world, but I'm not alone in thinking this. The archaeologists who've done excavations in Phoenicia, Canaan, and also done excavations in Carthage are also disturbed by what they find. They find rooms full of earthen jars with the burnt remains of babies in them. Large numbers. Of course, what you cannot tell by looking at the jar is, was that baby alive or dead when it was burned? If you're burning a corpse, the baby already died. Of course, infant mortality rates are very high. It's not a lot less disturbing if you just burned up a baby that's dead than if you burned a live baby. Do we have direct evidence that would tell us that they're actually burning live babies? Well, not quite. Now, the Romans hate the Carthaginians. Can we say almost anything that the Romans say about the Carthaginians is suspect because of their bias? We can say that, but let's say what they're saying that the Carthaginians do. They say that the Carthaginians have their gods, their graven gods, and sometimes these gods are, you can't really see me because the camera only goes down so far. I'm not going to play with the camera because we might end up just seeing what's on the ceiling. So let me just, you know what a lap looks like. You got your legs out here, and the graven image would sometimes have its arms out in a horizontal manner. And you lay the live baby, according to the Romans, you lay the live baby there, and just in front of the image there would be fire. It'd be a bonfire or something like that. Of course, there's going to be a celebration and some kind of ritual going on. As part of the ritual, they would take these babies and then roll it over into the flames. Of course, the baby's going to scream in its mortal agony. So what you do when that happens, you blow your horns, you have this great shout praising the gods. So you don't have to listen to the baby as it dies. I don't know, but it's very hard to give a great deal of sympathy for Carthaginian civilization. Spread of the use of the alphabet. If you had taken this course from me, unfortunately, I've enjoyed this class, believe me, it's a lot of fun. On the other hand, I've been teaching it for a long time. And if you took the course from me a long time ago, a couple of decades ago, I would have told you that the Phoenicians invented the alphabet and they spread it. Now, I think that's out of date. Let's look at the Phoenician alphabet. You would think that you need written records. Ocean exploration, how do I get with that? Let's try alphabet again. There we go. The modern alphabet, as you know it, actually comes from this. Now, we have the Phoenician alphabet. Remember, they speak Hebrew. And you have the Hebrew alphabet over here. So the Hebrew alphabet owes a lot to the, well, it's directly borrowed from the Phoenician. Why do you need an alphabet? If you are traveling long distances and you have to have economic records, you really don't want to have a clay tablet in cuneiform. Hieroglyphics are way too cumbersome, and they're very, very hard to learn. You're not going to pack scholars around with you all the time with several years of training just to be functionally literate. You want something that's easy, that you can readily learn. I knew a lot of letters when I was growing up, but we didn't really, this is generational, right? We really didn't sit down and memorize the alphabet until I was in the 3rd grade. I think it's very unusual nowadays. If you go into 1st grade, you don't already know the alphabet. I mean, these are little kids, about 5, 6 years old. Kids know the alphabet. And already, bright kids. I'm sure you all fit in that category. We're probably sounding out words and getting the rudiments of reading. See, an alphabet is such a simple system that it can be learned readily, rapidly, even by young children. Enormous advantages in literacy that can come from this. Now, years ago, I would have told you, sat down and said, well, these people invented the alphabet. Unfortunately, that's not the oldest known alphabet. We do want to believe that the Phoenicians took this and were, as practical people, used it and spread its use. However, it's not the earliest known alphabet. Can we say another theory now is, in archaeology examining caves, in areas like the Sinai, in areas of Egypt, they have found small shards of writing on them. Now, I'm not going to say that you've got a long text or anything, but apparently, much earlier than the ones we know about among the Phoenicians, they're actually using an alphabet. Now we've got a completely different theory as to the origin of the alphabet. And that would be that the escaped slaves, hiding out in caves in the Sinai, had to have the ability to communicate with each other easily, and something could easily be learned. See, this flies in the face of the idea that we tend to have these great advances taking place in large civilized communities. If this theory holds up over time, we will make an argument, perhaps, that a lot of our advances are not necessarily in big cities, but they're in areas of what we call desperation. We really need to know this. Okay, first known in Egypt. First ones we know right now is in Egypt. We say this is a great advance. This makes total literacy possible. This makes it possible for virtually everybody who's mentally capable of doing this in your society to be able to read and write. Enormous. Can we say all alphabets are based on the Phoenicians? Let's look at the development of the alphabet. We have the Phoenicians talking to the Greeks. And the Greeks are very good learners. They learn ship design, they learn how to build, and they are interested in seeing what the Phoenicians are doing. Phoenicians are writing with an alphabet. So the Greeks say, well, we can do that. So they take the basic ideas. Can we get a bigger one up here? Of the Phoenician alphabet. This all looks like a bunch of scribbles to me, but of course, if you're taught the symbolism, really what they mean, you do have a pretty good idea that this is fairly easy to learn. Do I want to make a comparison with Hebrew alphabet? We can see similarities. Maybe that's not going to display. Okay, got a problem. It's not working. Anyway, it's not displaying the way I want it to display. But as making comparisons, you can see the similarities. If you remember that our alphabet does not come from the Hebrew alphabet; it comes from the Phoenician. So, excuse me, it comes from the Greek. Initially, this is written really without vowels. Remember, I gave this big pitch when I misunderstood what I was saying earlier on, and I said that the you're talking about syllables, and I saw syllables, and my brain went off and said vowels. Well, you don't need vowels for understanding, if you know the language anyway. But why would the Greeks add vowels if you don't need them for understanding? In poetry, some of the elements of poetry, it's helpful to know what the quality of the vowel is to understand the poetry. The Greeks are very much into literature. They're very much into poetry. And it's very convenient for them to add vowels. Now, one of the differences here is this. Both the Hebrew and the Phoenician alphabet read right to left. And our alphabet, starting with the Greeks, read left to right. There's a number of theories as to how that developed. Apparently, there were stones when the Greeks would write on them, and it's kind of awkward. I don't have a stone here to show you, but you kind of read it by turning it to get the letters straight up. But you could turn in one direction and turn in another direction, and apparently you ended up with some advantages in reading left to right. Another advantage is when you're writing. If you write left to right, and you're right-handed, most people are, then you don't smear your ink. If you write right to left, you do have a tendency to smear your ink. So anyway, there's a number of theories as to that. The Greeks add vowels. And then later, the Etruscans, which we'll talk more about when we discuss discuss Rome. The Etruscans take the Greek alphabet and they change it and moderate it for their purposes. And let's look at the Etruscan alphabet. And, okay, it's going a certain direction. Then the Latins, the Romans, take this and make it the Roman alphabet, which you're very familiar with. Now that isn't the end of the saga, actually, because the Romans write in uppercase. In the Middle Ages, you have two alphabets. You have the capital letters and the lowercase letters. They're not the same. Also in the Middle Ages, you do add our last letters, like W and K. So that is actually how the alphabet gets to us. I made a big pitch earlier on. We were talking about the importance of writing. Let me make another big pitch. The importance of writing is still as strong, but the alphabet is such an enormous advantage in anything that's gone on before that you do have the possibility of totally literate societies. Probably the first totally literate society were the ancient Hebrews. You have to be able to read the scripture to understand the holy word of the Lord. Probably excluding slaves by the 2nd century AD in the Roman Empire, we do approach total literacy. This doesn't really happen again until the modern world, but it does make it possible. And you and I can both read and write. Okay. Well, let me talk a little bit about, kill a little time here talking about, well, maybe I shouldn't kill time, but let me at least say this, that as you know, phonetically is the idea of the alphabet, that one character carries one sound. As you know, that our modern alphabet in English has 26 letters, but there's something like 44 sounds in modern English. It's one of the reasons why spelling is so challenging, because the E, for example, takes, what, 4 or 5 sounds for the letter E. So the modern alphabet isn't perfectly phonetical. Since I can't spell word beans, it'd be very helpful if we, in fact, in my estimation, did have a truly phonetic alphabet. Those of you, you're all brilliant people, and you can probably spell very well. It's probably not a problem for you. Well, our next point of discussion will be China. And China develops it largely in isolation. I'm going to stop with this. I know I don't want to shortchange you on your lectures, but if I get going on this for a couple of minutes, I'll simply end up repeating this next time. So, time off for good behavior. You're great people. You're staying with the course. You're all going to do very well. And I appreciate you very much. And I will speak to you again next time. In the meantime, enjoy.